Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome to episode 15 of building a modular model railway. In today's layout update, I'm going to be taking a look at adding some lighting to the layout around the station area, just to make it feel a bit more alive. Now, I'm going to be doing this in two sections, first starting off with the lights that I want to be on all the time, and then secondly moving on to lights that I want to be able to switch on and off. First though, let's take a look at how I've actually got the lights inside the buildings. So over the last few months, I've been working on some kits for the station area. In fact, you've probably already seen some of them in my previous videos slowly coming together. That said, I am using some pre-made buildings as well, most notably this station building from the Hornby Scaledale range, which I've had for a while now. Inside the building, I have a very small LED, which for the moment is simply black tacked onto the inside of the roof, along with the wires to keep them out of the way. And then on the ends of the wires, I've soldered a little 2-pin connector. The plan is to drill a hole through the baseboard, and then I can use this connector to join up to the power source for the lights. Next we have the signal box built from the Wills kit, and this was really one of the main reasons why I wanted to light all the buildings, since I did go to the trouble of adding a full interior to this model. And then sitting just behind it, I've also got this small brick hut kit, which actually came free with a magazine a while back. It's not completely finished yet, but I think it does make quite a good small signing on room for the Preservation Society, so it'll just sit here beside the shed. The shed itself is obviously quite a large structure, and being a working environment, I decided I wanted to use a different type of lighting here. The LEDs in the other buildings all have a warm yellowish colour to them, but for the shed I decided to have bright white lights in here instead. Now luckily I had a bit of LED tape left over from a previous project, and I was able to stick this on the inside of the roof. Again, I then soldered my 2 wires to this with the connector on the end. So that's all the buildings, now we get to the fun part. The first thing to do was to drill holes through the baseboard for each of the buildings. Once the hole was drilled, the wires could then be passed through and the building sits on top to disguise it. And as you can see, for both the signal box and the hut, this was a fairly simple process. I had to take a bit more care with the shed though, as this would be sitting on the clay base that I laid in the previous episode. Since I wanted to avoid cracking the surface, I made a small pilot hole first. And then I opened that up by using a larger drill bit, and by going a bit slower, I managed not to do any damage. The station buildings though are another kettle of fish entirely, since they of course need raising up to the same height as the platforms. These are made from layers of foam board stuck together, so using the same material I made a little extension to the back of the platform. And eventually I'll get round to doing the rest of the land here too, which will gradually rise up to meet the station building. With the extensions temporarily removed, I then drilled a hole through the baseboard just like I did for the rest of the buildings. And then because the wires will be passing through both the baseboard and the depth of the platforms, I'm going to make a little tube for them to run through. And I'm going to do that using cake dowels. These are essentially little plastic cylinders that are intended for making cakes with multiple tiers, but I think a short section of this will do the job quite nicely. The baseboard top and the platforms come out at about 3 centimeters deep, so I'll just mark the tube, cut off the end, and as you can see it sits in the hole I made through the baseboard and comes up to the height of the platform. So now I'm going to glue down the foam board extensions behind the platform, and I'm just using some good old PVA glue for this. And with the glue on, I just move the pieces into position and then press them down. You can see as well I've carved out a little gap for the tube to fit through. That goes into place just there, and it'll be flush with the surface eventually too once I glue it in. And now that I've drilled the holes for each of the buildings, I know exactly where the connectors will be, so I can turn my attention to the wiring beneath the baseboards. So I've got one of the modules on its side, and you can see it's definitely a bit of a mess under here. Although I have to admit this is the worst one, since it has all of the power distribution and also the point and the signal controllers as well. Eventually I do hope to tidy all this up at some point, but certainly the work I do today I'm going to try my best to make it as neat as possible. So I have a 12-volt power distribution board, and this supplies power to all of the accessories on this module and the control panel too. For the building lights, I'm just going to add wires to one of the spare outputs, and in this instance I'm using blue for positive and then white for negative, just so I know it's different from the DCC power bus. And then I'm going to run these wires all the way along to the far end of the module to over where the shed will stand. Now this is a 12 volt DC power bus, but the majority of the LEDs I'm using are only rated for 3 volts, which means if I put 12 volts through them, they'll blow. The LEDs come with a set of resistors that you're supposed to solder to each light to drop the voltage down, but I've decided to use this converter instead, which is what you can see me attaching to the baseboard now. Essentially 12 volts will flow into this device, and then I can control how much it puts out, so I can step it down to 3 volts for all of the lights that come after it. The advantage of using this, of course, means that I don't have to solder a resistor to every single light on the layouts. I've got quite a few of them to do, and if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know I'm not very good at soldering. The disadvantage, of course, is that if this converter stops working for any reason, then all of the lights on this circuit are at risk, where if each one had a resistor and one of those stopped working, all the other lights would still be fine. As I mentioned before though, the lights in the shed are different, and these are quite happy to run off 12 volts, so I've added one connection before the converter specifically for those LEDs. I'm then going to run another set of wires from the output of the voltage regulator down the full length of the module, and that will supply the lights in all the other buildings. And of course I'll add a little clip here just to keep everything nice and tidy. I then work my way along the module, and wherever these wires pass near to the holes I've drilled for the buildings, I add another 2-pin socket which will connect up with the plug I put on each of the buildings. So this is the connector for the signal box here, and you can see just above it the hole where the wires will pass through. Before I connect up any of the buildings though, I need to make sure the voltage is right, so I'll turn the power on and the voltage regulator springs into life. As you can see on the display, it says it's putting out 11.7 volts, but if I just start turning this little screw up here with the screwdriver, you can see that the voltage starts to drop, and I'm going to go down to just below 3 volts. I could make it exactly 3 volts, but I'm going to play it safe here and go a little bit under, and then I can always turn it up if I need to. And now with the layout back the right way up, the PVA glue has fully dried on my little extension to the station, so I think we can get the buildings back in place. And you can see the tube I glued in is now flush with the surface, and of course I'll be giving this whole area a layer of filler and a coat of grey paint too to blend it in with the existing platforms. Now even though this is 2 separate buildings, each with their own lights, because they join together, I'm just using the one hole for both of them, and here you can see the wires poking through below the baseboard. I can now connect both of these up to the power supply, and it doesn't matter which socket they're plugged into as long as the red and black wires on the connectors match up. It's the same situation for the rest of the buildings too. The hut and the signal box both go in place, and the shed also sits down on the hard standing, with the wires being fed through the hole to the underside of the baseboard. As before, each building is then joined up to the lighting bus, and then it's time to turn on the power. So here we go, the moment of truth, and there we go! It's funny how it just brings the building to life a bit, isn't it? You can see the LEDs shining through the resin building though, which is creating that odd glow on the roof, but I do think I can sort that out with some black paint or a piece of card in the future. And here we can see the signal box is nicely lit up as well. This definitely has to be my favourite, I think. Considering it's got all the interior detail, now that it's lit up, it's easy to see inside and it makes it all worthwhile. Here is the little hut just behind the signal box, and when you're really close up like this, it's quite clear that there's no interior inside there, but I do have an idea for something simple I could do here to improve this and the station buildings too. And then finally we come to the shed, and you can definitely see the colour difference with the LEDs. This is much more of a bright white instead of the warm glow of the other buildings, and I like that there is that contrast. It may be a bit too bright though. The wall is glowing somewhat and you can see the silhouette of the wires. The light is also leaking out underneath as well on the uneven clay surface, but I do have a plan to fix all this in the future. So there we go, the buildings are lit and stage 1 is complete, but there is still a long way to go. Now that the buildings all have lights in them, it's time to move on to something a bit more ambitious. Now, you may remember from the episode where I installed the semaphore signals that I mentioned all of those have an LED installed into the lamps. They look great when I tested them individually, so now I want to get these wired up as well. The only thing is that the lamps wouldn't always be lit during the day, so I need to have a way to switch these on and off, and I think I can do this using DCC. This is a little accessory decoder I got from Heathcote Electronics, and it basically acts like an on-off toggle switch, but it's controlled over DCC. So here it is wired up amongst all the other various things on the layout, and as before, the wires come down from the power distribution board through another voltage regulator, and then you can see the decoder is next in the chain. The white wires screw into two of the terminal blocks, which allow it to act like a switch, and then the red and black wires on the right are where I've connected a feed from the DCC power bus. I've also added one of the push-fit connectors to this too, so that when I'm not using DCC, for example when I'm running the Hornby live stream, then I can just disconnect this so I don't damage the decoder. After this, I've got another distribution board, and that's because the signals don't come off the layout, so I can just screw the wires from those into the positive and negative terminals on here. It's not just the lights in the signals I want to control though, as I also have these really nice station lamps to install as well. They come in packs of 3, and I'm going to add these along the length of both platforms. Inside the lamp section there's a tiny LED, and then at the bottom you can see there's a hollow support where the two wires then come out. So to fix these to the platforms, I first made a little pilot hole using my pin drill, and of course most of this is just foam board, so it goes through really easily. Next, I then got the proper drill and widened up the hole, as well as drilling through the baseboard top as well. The hardest part of this process though is really trying to get the wires through the hole. Once I succeeded in that though, I could then just gently pull them from underneath. Here you can see what the lamp looks like in position, although admittedly it's not quite straight yet, seeing as it's not fixed down. To attach it to the layout, I just added a bit of super glue to a cocktail stick, and then this was smeared over the support rod and also the underside of the base. I then pressed the lamp down into position, and because I used super glue, it didn't take very long for it to set. So that's the process for one lamp, and now I just had to repeat this on the opposite side. And there we go, two lamps in position opposite each other. And then I also did the rest of the station off camera, so you can see I now have a row of lights down each platform. There's 4 on platform 2 and 3 on platform 1, since obviously I couldn't have a lamppost where the building is. Also, I'll need to add a footbridge at some point too, so I've tried to give myself enough space between the lamps so that I can fit that in place in the future. All I had to do now was sort out the wiring underneath, and some of the lamps were quite far away from the distribution board, so I just soldered on extension wires, and these were then insulated afterwards. And then it was just a case of connecting all the wires up to the positive and negative terminals on the distribution board. With that done, we're ready to see if it all works. So it's time to test everything out. I've got the power on again, and you can see the buildings are lit up, but not the lamps. Underneath the board, I've set the converter to 3 volts again, and I've also programmed the accessory decoder too, which was really easy to do, and it was all covered in the instructions. As I press the button on my phone, you can see underneath the baseboard the decoder lights up to show that it's active, but that's nothing in comparison to what happens on the layout. If I press the button again, boom, all the lights come to life, and doesn't it just look fantastic? The lamps really do look great, and it's certainly a detail I'm really excited to have on the layout. Like I said earlier, I've also wired up the lamps in all the signals too, and you can see the light shining through the lenses now. I will admit that they are a bit bright at the moment in comparison to the station lamps. I could step down the voltage a bit, but that would also dim the lampposts too. So I think probably what I will actually do is much more simple. I'll just add a very thin layer of black paint over the top of the LEDs, and I think that'll dim them down enough. The ground signals are definitely the worst though. I think anyone near these would be blinded in reality, so it may just be that I forgo the LEDs on those, but the rest really aren't that bad. Like I said though, I do think it adds a lot of atmosphere to the layout, especially when I'm filming in the dark like this, and it does almost make me want to film a whole nighttime running session. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this latest update from the Modular Model Railway, and don't forget, if you want to be the first to see what progress I'm making, then please do consider becoming a channel member and you can get involved in the process too. For now though, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!